with the United States. And we were created by the initiative, the attempted initiative of Christopher Columbus for a purpose, who was following the inspiration of Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa, who had died before that time. But Columbus had consulted with close confederates of Cusa. And Cusa had said, because of the crisis in Europe, we do what we'd call today the oligarchical features of European society, that it was necessary to take the best contributions of European culture and take them across the great oceans of the world to other shores in order to create the kind of system of government of nations which was needed. Columbus was inspired to undertake this project about 1480 AD. And as we know, a dozen years later, having received a good deal of advice from the survivors of the associates of Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa, set forth. This colonization, the exploration and colonization by Columbus failed not because it was his fault, but because by 1492 we had entered a period of religious warfare in Europe, which had broken out. It was to break out more seriously around Henry VIII. So Europe from that period, from 1492, with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, which was the beginning of this great horror show, until 1648, the Peace of Westphalia, Europe was torn apart by a bloody mess. So in this period, while the Habsburgs was still a great power, Europe was unable to realize the objectives which Cusa and others had had for European civilization. And the Hispanic and Portuguese settlements in America had failed because they were under Habsburg influence. So the beginning of what became the United States, in terms of policy, came with the Plymouth Settlement in 1620 and the establishment of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so the constitutional features, including those of economy, developed in Massachusetts up until about 1690, was the basis for what later became the United States. The United States was a mission to take the best of European civilization, to bring it across the waters at a relatively safe distance, one would hope, from Europe, which was a sinkhole of corruption, and to establish here a place for the best of European civilization in the American continent, and thus to set a beacon for humanity as a whole. This was in jeopardy at that time because of James II of England and William of Orange. But at a later point, Leibniz personally had a great influence in England in a faction which was opposed to this degeneration. And his influence is transmitted back into the United States by the way of a German scientist, Abraham Kästner, who called attention to the earlier work of Leibniz on this question, came to Benjamin Franklin and Company, and Franklin, as a leader in the United States, set into motion what became the United States constitutional system. We went through two phases. First of all, the Declaration of Independence, and secondly, the formation of a federal constitution. Now, the Declaration of Independence was won because at that time, in Europe, nations of Europe were opposed to the British Empire. Now, the British Empire was not an empire of the English people. It was an empire of a certain Venetian interest, of financial interest, which controlled the Anglo-Dutch system, especially since the accession of William of Orange. And so the fight was by Europe, which supported the United States struggle for independence. Russia, France, other countries in continental Europe rallied to assist the United States through the League of Armed Neutrality, to assist the United States in securing its right to a presidency. What happened then later, of course, because of the French Revolution, which was a complicated mess of corruption, the destruction of France And the greatest asset that Britain ever had, Napoleon Bonaparte, fought wars on the continent of Europe, which destroyed Europe to the point that the British Empire was consolidated at 1812, 1815. And from that point on, the United States was engaged in a great struggle for its own survival, not only from outside forces, but from corruption which spread within, like the founding of the Bank of Manhattan by Aaron Burr, an agent of the British and a traitor to the United States who should have been hung. So we were, up until the victory in the Civil War, where we defeated the British who created the Confederacy. And we established. Then Lincoln was shot. And the execution, the assassinations of our presidents, of some presidents in particular, has been a crucial part of our history. We got into World War I because of the assassination of McKinley, without which it would not have been possible. We got into World War II for similar kinds of reasons. The Harding problem was also part of this reason, because it brought the real scum into place in the United States. We were saved by the Franklin Roosevelt election and what he did. We were ruined by Truman. And we've been ruined more and more, with a few exceptions, all the way down since that time. We have, instead of patriots, we have people who admire the British Queen. Even presidents who admire the British Queen. The force of imperialism. The enemy of the United States. So there's a continuous struggle by a nation, our nation, which has a philosophical intent, a constitutional intent, which is the greatest on this planet. Our Constitution is a true Constitution. It is not a catch-all of this odds and ends, rules and this voted up. We're a mission-oriented nation, to be a republic, but also be a factor for world civilization as a whole. As Franklin Roosevelt understood this, and what he would have done and attempted to do had he not been replaced by his successor, Truman, who was a skunk. Eisenhower was a good president, but his administration was a skunk. Not as bad as Truman, perhaps, but still a skunk. Then you had Kennedy. Now, I didn't really admire the Kennedy family at that time. I didn't think they were the best thing for the United States. But John did a fairly good job. And he listened to Douglas MacArthur, which is what got him killed. Because MacArthur advised him to the effect that the United States must not become involved in any extended land war in Asia. And Kennedy was committed to that. And the only way they were going to get that policy turned around was kill him. And they did. And it wasn't some Oswald character. It was three other guys associated with the attempted assassinations of de Gaulle from France and Spain, who walked in and did the job. But the killing of Kennedy meant that we were going to war. It took us a decade after the killing of Kennedy before we fully got into the war. But the steps were made. Since that time, we've been in extended land wars in Asia and other places. Wars that never should have been fought. Wars we could have won without a war. If you have enough strength where people have to listen to you, when they can't make war against you, and you've got a good case, by diplomacy and by imaginative approaches, you can usually resolve a problem of that nature, which might lead to war without actually fighting it. The point is to be able to defend one's nation if necessary, but to use that capability to prevent your having to be drawn into wars. What has ruined the world? How have empires repeatedly, since the time of the Peloponnesian War, how have empires in European civilization been ruled over nations by extended war? The Peloponnesian War, for example. Greece had prevailed over the Persian Empire, and the Peloponnesian War the Greeks destroyed themselves. Between three financial groups, one in Athens, one in Corinth, and one in Syracuse. The whole history of the Roman Empire was an empire ruled by what? By killing off wars among subordinate groups, by organizing wars among its intended victims. How was civilization destroyed in the 14th century? When the Venetians organized wars in the 14th century, which became the New Dark Age. How was Europe weakened and destroyed in the 16th century, in the 17th century? By war. 1492, with the expulsion of the Jews, till 1648, till the Peace of Westphalia. How was an empire recreated by the British? By the 7 Years' War. The nations of Europe got into a quarrel, and the British and Dutch sat there and waited to collect the empire. They didn't get an empire of the British monarchy, but they got an empire of the British East India Company, which was the empire at that time. So how was Europe managed? As Bismarck said in the 1890s, after he'd been discharged, we're going to have another 7 Years' War. A general war in Europe, a 7 Years' War to ruin Europe in the interest of the British Empire. And that's happened. They killed McKinley. And the United States, which was committed to opposing the British Empire, switched because a son of a traitor, or a nephew of a traitor, Teddy Roosevelt, became president. And we switched sides. Woodrow Wilson, the great leader of the Ku Klux Klan, the man who reorganized the Ku Klux Klan in the post-war period. Again, we went into World War I like idiots. We had no business there. We were destroyed and weakened. And the killing of McKinley made that possible. Just as the killing of Kennedy made possible what has happened to us since his death. Johnson was scared. He was convinced those 3 rifles were aimed at the back of his neck if he should oppose their policy. He backed off. He let us be ruined because he was scared, and not without some justification, considering the record of things. Presidents get killed. The way they got the World War I going, it started with Bismarck. Bismarck was fired under British influence. The British ordered his being fired as Chancellor of Germany, and we got into war. How did it happen? First, they killed the President of France, Sadi Carnot. And they do similar things. How did they get the whole thing going? By killing McKinley. It never would have happened if McKinley hadn't been killed. We were turned around. We were ruined by getting involved in that war in Indochina, which we had no business getting into. We're now being ruined in a similar way by the British in Afghanistan. Idiocy. Insanity. We don't really need to make wars. We may have to use military force, but actually today, as the way it stands today, if we do the right thing, we do not need wars. We may need certain special actions, short-term special actions, but we won't need wars. You want to fight a general war? You want to fight a nuclear war? You want to fight a thermonuclear war? You want to fight a war of diseases, plagues? You want to call out for all-out war in the world? No. You may have to discipline a certain part of the world and bring peace. But you're in there to bring peace and enforce the peace. Not to fight general wars. And we're used by the British Empire, or what the real empire is, to get us to do foolish things, to get into foolish quarrels with people who may be problematic, but there's a better way to deal with the thing. And people are ambitious to fight these wars. And sometimes the folly is crystal clear. A piece of insanity beyond, and the president makes it even worse than McChrystal did, and his crowd. So that's our problem. We are a nation based on a European cultural basis, a basis which was defined by the circles of Nicholas of Cusa, who was the central figure in the architect of modern European science and culture. And the effort was when the what happened with Constantinople and following that, when Europe was going back into disgusting conditions again after the Renaissance, they said, go across the oceans, meet people across the oceans, and take our cultural achievements with us to these people. But don't take our diseases, our political diseases, with you. And that, in effect, was done. And we, with this picture, which I've given some general outline to, we, in a sense, produced a nation, which is the only possible rallying point still today to save this planet from hell. Without this nation, you cannot organize the world to avoid the hell that's coming down on it now. Without this United States. And we have to deal with our United States as an instrument for that purpose. We have to have a presidency, a presidential system, and we don't have a congressional system. We have a presidential system. And the congressional function is a part of the presidential system. It's not an independent factor. We need a presidential system that functions. And we're going to have to put this president either in a cage inside the Oval Office, probably with rubber walls, and somehow get a presidency. And if he can't do that, we're going to have to replace him. Because without a functioning presidency of the United States, I don't see much of a chance for civilization in the period today. I don't believe in making promises that are not feasible, and I don't see a possibility. Under this president, in his present behavior, I don't see any chance for the United States or the world. Now, what has happened is this. Europe has been destroyed. It has no, Western and Central Europe, have no functional value today. I think that France and Germany, if they were freed of British control under the present European system, I think that they would tend to go back to sensible approaches and would cooperate with us and others. But as long as they're stuck in the Euro system, Western and Central Europe is not going to go anywhere, not anywhere good. And since what happened this past weekend, as you now see, the entire financial system of the world is disintegrating. Whole nations are bankrupt, hopelessly bankrupt. We're in a general breakdown crisis, a chain reaction breakdown crisis of the entire international monetary financial system and economic system. Now, what I've done is to propose some time ago that we get certain people in Russia, China, and India, and the United States as a block of nations around which combined are sufficiently powerful as a combination to force the needed changes on a planetary level. In other words, by net changes, I don't mean jobs. You know, the idea of giving somebody a job to rake leaves is not exactly an economic development program. What we need is production jobs. We need nuclear power. We need a national rail system. We need a space program, a real space program, revived. Because we don't have factories of any significance anymore. We shut them down, especially under George W. Bush Jr. and this thing there. They've shut it down. What happened to the automobile industry? What's happened to the aircraft industry? Go all to all the high-tech industries we had. What happened to them? They're gone. We still have the knowledge of that technology, but we are losing the people who are able to practice it. We have jobs. Yes, what are jobs worth? Raking leaves? You build a world by raking leaves or doing social work? No, you build industries. Today that means, for example, nuclear power. Technologically, it's impossible to develop the population of this planet without nuclear power on an extensive basis. And that's not enough. What you have to count on is higher energy flux density. You have to increase the energy flux density of the power in the hands of labor. If you can't do that, you cannot achieve the productivity necessary to save this nation and save the world. We talk about a vast program of this. We have to go to space. We have to undertake the industrialization of the moon. Because if we don't do the industrialization of the moon, we can't get to Mars. And if we can't get to Mars, which may take several generations to do that with human beings, we can get there already with the slow craft, 300 days or something like that. But if you're going to bring human beings there, you've got to talk about a mere few days between moon orbit and Mars orbit. And that involves some problems. But we pretty much shut down NASA, which was the mission orientation for that sort of thing. Now, the Mars project is necessary for humanity in the sense that humanity functions on the basis of something about human beings which animals don't have. The animal world has creativity and the development of species, new species, varieties, and so forth. Even the non-living world undergoes development. The universe, the physical universe, is undergoing development all the time. But it has no will to develop. It has no knowledgeable will to choose to develop. It develops because the creativity is built into the universe. Man is different. Man has the willful creativity to shape the universe. And therefore, man cannot function without having the inspiration to use that ability, that creative power, to achieve higher goals than are currently practiced. For example, we have a planet of very poor people. In Asia in particular, in Africa, a terrible mass of poor people. We're running short of many resources. We have to create new resources. We have to increase the productive powers of labor of the existing population. We have 6.7 billion people now on this planet. We're headed towards 7. We have to progress to meet that challenge. We have to inspire our people each in their own culture to take this mission orientation for mankind as their responsibility. In order to challenge people, what do? Well, you educate them. And you adopt missions which make goals, higher goals, clear to those people. And children say, I want to do this. We had back in the 1960s, even into the beginning of the 70s, you had children who were saying, I want to go into space. The moon landing program of NASA was an inspiration. The Russian-Soviet program was also an inspiration to the planet. You have to have these kinds of goals, of missions for mankind to use his creative powers to raise humanity to a higher level of existence. You have to talk to your children and grandchildren about this kind of goal. And it's only when you get their imagination stirred that they become creative. And without the bestirring that creativity, mankind does not progress. And that's what we used to say about the United States. We were a nation that was committed to that sort of thing. What we did under Franklin Roosevelt was an example of a nation which had been crushed under a legacy of Teddy Roosevelt and Wilson and similar types of scoundrels. We were almost destroyed. But we rebuilt, and facing the challenge of the war in Europe and the challenge of unemployment, the challenges here, we mobilized our people to create a machine which is the most powerful machine the world had ever seen. The machinery of the United States, which was deployed for World War II. The intention was to continue the development of that machine in the post-war period, not for war purposes, but for construction of the planet. Roosevelt had a clear plan for this thing. Truman had a different idea. Truman kissed the butt of Winston Churchill. And we've been getting the backlash from that ever since. We destroyed most of our capability. We destroyed our industries. We just shut them down. We had all kinds of projects, for post-war projects, which would have led to great achievements. And we shut them down. Nuclear power was one example of this thing. It was feasible, principally. Sometimes it takes you a couple of generations. Once an idea is clear and feasible, it may take you 2 or 3 generations to actually bring it online as effective. But the way in which to organize mankind, 2 questions. First, we have to understand culture. We have to understand national cultures in particular. Because national cultures embody, within the use of language and other things, embody the bits of knowledge and experience of past generations of that people. Therefore, you cannot go into a country and say you can't create a Tower of Babel, a one world economy. You have to use the culture of the various cultures of the people as your mobilizing force. Because it's in their imagination, which is associated, the powers of imagination associated with their culture, in which they are able to mobilize creativity. So you want to create the opportunity for upgrading them through fostering the benefits of their own creativity and inform them of the objectives that other people are achieving, which they may copy and build upon. So you need a system of sovereign nation states, of sovereign peoples, different cultures, each with its own sovereign expression, and the unity of these people for a common purpose, the purpose of humanity. To do that, you must stir the imagination, the powers of the imagination of the people. And what means reach to space. We're going to Mars. It will probably take us 3 to 4 generations to do that, to solve the scientific problems that are involved in overcoming very high speeds or rates of acceleration in interplanetary travel, which is required for moving mankind around. And this is not easy, but we know we can solve the problem. We just have to go through the steps of solving it. Take us 2 or 3 generations or more, but we'll get there. But as long as we inspire our young people, especially younger people, to look at their adulthood, we've got people in their 20s, they're going to be functioning probably for 50 years to come if we can get Obama out of office. He doesn't seem to be in favor of that sort of thing. And they should be looking forward to what they're going to produce within their own lifetime as benefits for humanity of which they will be proud. It's a span of about 60 years, approximately, that they think in terms. Most people think that way. They live that long. And when people can find a purpose in their life, in the sense that what they are doing now, what they are preparing themselves to accomplish, will lead within their own lifetime to the foundations of something much better than they have today. That's when you can capture and sustain the imagination of a people in its own culture. And when people are united, even they have different cultures, if they're united by a common purpose to do this, to cooperate to do this, then we have peace among nations on this planet. And that should be our goal. It should be our goal now. What seems impossible to small-minded people are the ideas that are necessary to get out of the pit that we're in today.